IPAM is Microsoft Windows IP address management platform, and it allows administrators to manage the IP address space. Now, this might seem redundant. We've already talked about some tools to manage IP address space, DHCP being the primary one. So basically, IPAM is sort of DHCP on steroids. It allows us to do a lot more with management than just using DHCP servers. So here's the challenge. Let's say you have a large network with maybe 15 different DHCP servers. You've got DNS servers laying all over the place, and so forth and so on. There's a lot of management that you have to do that's decentralized. In other words, you have to create and edit settings across the entire network on all these different platforms, and that can be rather difficult. So, to manage all of these different platforms in different places. So IPAM allows you to centralize that management. I'll give you a good example. Let's say you made a change to your DNS infrastructure and you need DHCP to hand out a new server for a new IP address for DNS. Well, if you don't have IPAM, you would have to go in and make sure that you set that in all of the scopes on all of your DHCP servers across the enterprise, which, as you can imagine, a large enterprise, that can be rather difficult. You might miss something. However, with IPAM, you would only need to set this one time, and you can apply that change to all of your DHCP scopes across the entire network. IPAM also gives you visibility across the entire network. You don't have to take inventory by going into 15 different DHCP servers to see how IP addresses are being utilized. You can do all that centralized. So it makes a lot of sense to use IPAM for those reasons. It handles forest-wide discovery and management of all Microsoft DHCP, DNS, NPS, and DC servers. So it'll automatically go out and inventory all of these services on your network that are in the forest, that are in your forest. It monitors DHCP scopes and DNS zones. So that's what really gets centralized here is DHCP scopes and DNS zones. So problems that you can solve with IPAM, you can manual address management is much easier. Inefficiency in keeping track of and managing DNS and DHCP servers. Difficulties in keeping track of address use across multiple domains and sites. Global changes to all DHCP servers, such as changing a DNS server address or any of the other parameters that we talked about in DHCP. Problems identifying available IP addresses quickly because you have to kind of jump around the different DHCP servers to do that. So the IPAM infrastructure consists of servers and managed servers, or IPAM servers and managed servers. So the IPAM server is the centralized server that collects information about all of these, about DHCP and DNS servers. So it basically goes out and discovers all of your DNS and DHCP servers and aggregates all of that information into a centralized database. And a managed server is the servers that it's inventorying. Those are the managed servers. And then finally, there's an IPAM client which you can use to install the management console if you don't want to manage IPAM from the server itself. So when you install that IPAM role on whatever's going to be that IPAM server, you don't have to manage it from there. You can manage it from your own computer. If you have Windows 10 or Windows 7, you can install the IPAM console or the IPAM client so you can manage the server from your own computer. So IPAM deployment has three topology options. You have centralized, where you have one centralized IPAM server that's deployed for the entire enterprise. And then you have distributed, where the IPAM server is deployed at each site in the network, each maintaining its own list. And then you can do a hybrid model where you have a centralized server that collects information from the entire enterprise, but you might have a IPAM server also deployed at some key locations, at some larger branch locations. So here's an example of centralized deployment. You can see we have one IPAM server, and everything, even the remote servers, all are aggregated into that centralized IPAM server. And then in this example, Branch Office 1 has its own IPAM server, which then relays information to, and the information is also relayed to the IPAM server at the central location. So somebody could be at Branch Office 1 and managing, using IPAM to manage services at their office, and then at the central site, they can manage the entire enterprise, including Branch Office 2. But Branch Office 1 would not be able to manage anything at Branch Office 2 or at the headquarters. So to deploy IPAM, you have to take the following steps. You're going to determine the requirements for IPAM deployment, which of course is the Microsoft documentation. You're going to install IPAM server feature. just like all the other things that we've installed. Use roles and features. Then IPAM server provisioning, perform a server discovery, and then select servers and services to manage, and collect data from the managed services or managed servers. So those are the basic steps. So basically you're going to install IPAM using the feature. Then you're going to provision IPAM, which involves creating some group policies and setting up some user accounts. Then you're going to turn on discovery. It's going to go out and aggregate all of the information, and then you'll be able to start managing all of your IP addresses from a centralized location. So the requirements for the IPAM server, client, and managed servers. So the IPAM server has to be running standard or data center edition of Windows Server 2012 or later, and it must be a member of the domain. It does not need to be a domain controller, just a member of the domain. The IPAM client is not necessary, but this is what you would use to run the administration tools. And this just requires either Windows 2012 or Windows 8 or 8.1. I think earlier I said Windows 7, so it has to be at least 8 or 8.1. I was wrong about that. IPAM's managed server must be joined to a domain in the same forest as the IPAM. So anything that you're going to manage with IPAM, anything that's going to discover, has to be running server 2008 or later, and it has to be in the same forest. So it has to be on a member server that's in the same forest as the IPAM server. All right, so to install the IPAM server, you're going to use the add roles and features, or you could use the PowerShell commandlet install Windows feature, which we've talked about before. With group policy management and the Windows internal database are also required. So you're prompted to include these features. So you have to include group policy management and Windows internal database. I believe in 2016 it actually uses Microsoft SQL Server. I'm not 100% sure about that. There may actually be a way to use SQL Server in 2012 as well, but I've never done it. Which obviously would mean that you would need to do that if you had a really large network with a tremendously huge number of IP addresses that are being tracked and DNS information, but it's certainly not required. So to use the PowerShell, you would enter this command to install IPAM. It would be install Windows feature IPAM, include management tools. That way you also have the management tools. So this would set up the IPAM server. So as far as provisioning, in the IPAM server task window, you're going to click provision the IPAM server to start the provision IPAM wizard. So you'll need to select the type of IPAM database you want to use. The default is Windows internal database. But like I said, I'm pretty sure you can use SQL Server as well. You can select the method to provision managed servers. So the recommended is group policy provisioning. If you choose group policy, you have to enter a GPO name prefix. And this is the dialog where you would configure the database. So you can see here you could select Microsoft SQL Server, but by default it's going to use the Windows internal database. You may want to consider using SQL Server if you have an extremely large network. Then you select the provisioning method, which would be manual or group policy, I should say. So in this case, the user selected group policy. So in the Configure Server Discovery dialog box, you're going to select the domains where IPAM servers should search for servers to manage. So you can choose the server roles that you want to use for discovery. All are going to be selected by default. So typically you would use DHCP and DNS. So this is the server inventory review that you can see here. Now you can see in this example, IPAM access has been blocked. If you look at that second column, or I'm sorry, the third column, it says IPAM access status is blocked, which means we have a little bit more work to do here. So the IPAM server account has to be added to the DHCP administrators group in Active Directory in order for IPAM to access it. Basically, the IPAM service is running a user account that has to also have permission to access DHCP on the remote servers. So it should have been done automatically during the server provisioning process, but if not, you can do this manually. So on a domain controller in the domain, you're going to open the users folder, open IPA MUG group and IPAM UG group, and verify that the IPAM server account is a member. And then you can open DHCP administrators group and verify that IPAM user group is a member of this group. So again, you're just making sure they have permissions. Then you're going to run a PowerShell commandlet to provision the GPOs. So this is the command that you could use to do that. So selecting servers to manage. So then you're going to right-click on the server to manage in the server inventory windows, and you're going to add or edit the server to add it to the list of servers that we're going to manage with IPAM. Once the status has been changed to managed, the IPAM access status remains in the blocked state because the GPOs have to be applied. So if you go through this process and it still says blocked, you're going to have to go and run the gp update / force command on each of the managed servers that you want to access. So this is assuming that you haven't waited 90 minutes for all of this to push automatically. If you wait long enough, then this stuff will work, the next day for sure. But if you want to go ahead and set it up right away, you would run this command to force group policy to update. We actually talked about this earlier when we discussed group policy earlier in the course. So at that point, it should be unblocked. You'll be able to set what you want to manage with IPAM, and then you'll be able to retrieve data from the managed servers. So that process will begin. It'll start aggregating that data, and then when the data retrieve is finished, you'll see a message indicating the date and time of the last data collection, and you can schedule the next data collection if you like. So IPAM views the IP address space, which is divided into different units. There's the IP address block, which is the largest unit used to refer to the IP address space. Then you have IP address range, which is a pool of contiguous addresses in an IP address block. And then an IP address range group, which consists of one or more IP address ranges that are logically grouped by some criteria. And then unmapped address space, which is any IP address or IP address range that hasn't been assigned to an IP address block. So you can see that very quickly at a glance. And again, that's going to be aggregated across your entire network. So to create an IP address block, you're going to click IP address blocks in the IPAM console's navigation pane. Then you're going to click tasks and then add IP address block. The address block requires a network ID and prefix length. And after creating address blocks, your existing IP address ranges are listed when you click IP address blocks in the navigation pane. IPAM groups can be created to allow delegation of IPAM administration, which we just talked about a few minutes ago when that install didn't work. So the IPAM groups that get created are IPAM users, administrators, ASM administrators, IP audit administrators, and MSM administrators. See, these are user groups that get created for management purposes. So a number of IPAM scheduled tasks are created when you provision an IPAM server. So these are the scheduled tasks that are going to go out and aggregate all of this stuff for you periodically. So these are some of the collection tools that you have available in IPAM and how often they're going to run. And that's it. So in this unit, I talked about two primary topics. I talked about using dynamic access control, not to be confused with discretionary access control. Most people, when they see DAC, they think discretionary, which is really, NTFS is really a discretionary access control model. So it's kind of confusing that DAC has the same name because it kind of does the same thing, just more granular. But it's dynamic access control, which gives us more granular control to set access to files in Windows. So we can use the roles of users, what type of computer they're on. We can combine this with classification from our previous unit to give us very granular control over access to files by tagging additional resources. We also talked about using IPAM, which is how we can manage DNS and DHCP on the overall network and aggregate information from all of our DHCP servers, which makes it a little bit easier to manage IP addresses and DNS. And that concludes this unit.